Hello, my name's Alison Park and I'm here to give you a really quick tour of some of the key findings in our latest British Social Attitudes report. This is the 30th report in the series, which began back in 1983. So we've used it as an opportunity to really dig down and find out how Britain's attitudes and values have changed and why.
People are a lot more tolerant these days.
Nowadays, you don't really find people getting married.
We have no real strong views on religion.
I think that people have become more distrustful of politicians.
So I'll start with religion. So this is a very good example of how Britain now looks very different to Britain back in 1983. Then 68% of people, so just over 2/3, said they belonged to a particular religion, and that figure's now fallen to just over half, 52%.
No, I wouldn't say that I'm religious at all.
I'm a kind of curious agnostic.
But I don't go to church unless it's for weddings, funerals or christenings.
What's quite clear is that the decline has really been in the proportion of people who feel that sense of belonging to the Church of England, down from 40 to 20% now. When it comes to personal relationships, the kind of headline finding really is that Britain is a much more live and let live, tolerant society than it was back in the early 1980s. And perhaps the best example of this relates to our views about homosexuality.
If two people love each other, they should be allowed to get on with their love life like anybody else.
Men and men and women. That's fine and dandy. Whose business is that?
Back in the early 1980s, 50% thought that homosexuality was always wrong, and that figure actually increased over the decade. It now stands at just 22%, so it's more than halved in the last 30 years, and is a really good example of how Britain today is much more tolerant than it was 30 years ago. And we've seen very similar findings in relation to people's views about sex outside marriage, having children outside marriage, and so on.
No, I don't think you have to be married to have children.
People don't really take marriage as a serious vow anymore.
Because I've got 6 myself.
If I think about my grandparents' generation, they were all married.
When it comes to welfare, Britain now is certainly a lot less supportive of government intervention and a lot less sympathetic to those on welfare benefits than it was back in the 1980s.
The benefit system is totally messed up, and no, it isn't fair.
I think it's wrong because the taxpayers have to foot these bills.
Back then, in 1987, for example, 46% of people took the view that unemployment benefits were too low and caused hardship for those receiving them. That figure now stands at just 22%. It's also true that over the last year, there's actually been an upturn in sympathy for the first time in a long time, and we think this really reflects the impact of austerity.
I think people are slightly changing their attitudes towards it.
I think it's a real shame that it's become under such attack recently. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it and a lot of misinformation.
And the final area I want to mention relates to politics. So here, if we compare Britain now to Britain back in the 1980s, we find that we are far less trusting of governments and politicians than we were, even though back then we weren't exactly very trusting.
Nobody trusts politicians.
I trust some of them, yes.
I don't particularly trust politicians, no.
Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher.
So in 1987, just under 4 in 10 people trusted government to do the right thing for the country rather than the party. And that figure has now fallen to just 18%.
What I've seen of politics is the expensive scandals.
The only thing that my generation really can think of is the war on terror.
It's also equally true that there's been a long-term, very steady decline in the proportion of people who think it's a citizen's duty to vote.
I don't vote, actually. I'm not really into politics.
People are probably voting a little bit less now because they sometimes feel like they're too small to make a difference.
There is, however, some good news for people who are concerned with political engagement, in the sense that people are actually more likely to say they're interested in politics now than they were in the 1980s. So that's where I'm going to stop. There's loads more information in the report and indeed on our website if you want to play around with the data. Thank you.